Well, good morning. Welcome to our Micro Giants, to the awesome Consulting Amigos Four or the Four Consulting Amigos. And we're here today to talk about expert topics again, as we do normally on a Friday. This is really a conversation about how do you get motivated to do the things that you have to do to be successful. There are some folks who just naturally have what it takes, automatically reorder themselves to get the right stuff done. But the interesting dichotomy here is that the people who start businesses are oftentimes very creative, and very creative people oftentimes are motivated by the creativity that they're engaged in. That doesn't necessarily mean we are going to be able to get the right stuff done in the right order. So how do we manage that? What do we do? We're gonna throw it to John because he has some good and interesting concepts based on we all have a lot of experience in dealing with people and managing ourselves when we're on our own, and we have to figure that out. I'm going to mention briefly, and maybe we'll talk more about it, but there are some people in the world who have been around before we have, and I had to learn much from them. One of them is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Many of you have heard of Napoleon Hill. This was the very first guy that ever wrote on motivation and what successful people do. Um, he did an interview with Carnegie one time, and Carnegie was so impressed with how Napoleon Hill absorbed the information that he set him up to go talk to the Rockefellers and many of the Gilded Age people in those days, is to figure out, well, what did they do that caused them to be so successful? And he outlines that. It's a very good book. Second thing is the seven Habits of Highly Successful People by Stephen Covey. We've probably all read it. It's an older book at this point, but I think he takes what Napoleon Hill did and adds to it. His work's not completely original. He adds to it some very systemized ways to control yourself, to rank the activities you have to do, etc. So there are ways to kind of do this. And we're going to talk about some of those ways and how we ourselves manage to motivate ourselves in the early days when we were trying to get things going. John, you had mentioned earlier a couple of interesting points about who we are and personalities.
Yeah, we were just chatting about, what makes it happen. And I think I just reflected back in the day that there are certain things that I think each of us really love to do. We have a natural proclivity to do it. It's what helps us get out of bed in the morning because we've got the stuff that's exciting to do. And actually, in terms of companies, quite often the founding team or the founder of the company or the people who started off, they have this flair for doing something. They don't do something they don't like. They typically do something they do like. That's why they've decided to do it. And along the way, what attaches to the process are certain disciplines that are not that attractive. And it could be some accounting disciplines, it could be some HR disciplines, or it could be some technology disciplines. We've all had friends who are technology agnostic. I happen to really enjoy technology, so I dive into it and I like it, and I'm going to find out how it fits. But I got friends who are equally successful who don't want anything to do with technology. Somebody else is going to do that for them. They just want to deal with the concepts and the strategy. The point being is that founders of companies quite often have a predilection for certain things, and when it becomes necessary for them to do these auxiliary disciplines, it's not easy. And so I've made that, old Mary Poppins saying, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. There's a bit of truth in that. But the real truth is, at some point, we have to come to terms with the fact that if we don't balance the checkbooks, if we don't put the taxes in the appropriate slip, if we don't declare dividends and do the paperwork administratively called to by law, it doesn't matter how successful we are, we will end up failing. And we'll have to face that unfortunate discipline anyway. It'll just be under more pressure and more demand, and possibly with some penalties attached.
Mhm.
So, I don't know how we work through that, but at some point we have to, it's in some sense, put our big boy pants on and say, guys, I've got to do this stuff over here that I don't like. I'm going to have some alone time. I'm going to put myself in a room with a key in it. I'm going to turn off the phone, and I'm just going to dig in and do it.
Yeah.
The irony is, quite often, once you've done that and you come through and you realize you can do it, it's not a matter of lack of ability. It's just you don't like it. But you can do it. When you come through that, there's a sense of achievement, and I think we all enjoy that. And then you say, okay, now I really want to get somebody else to do it. If it's accounting, I'm going to call Ed up and say, Ed, can you please take over my accounting? And Ed says, I'd love to. Why? He likes it. I don't
Likes
happen to
it.
like it. Ed, you've dealt with, can we do a slight segue? As a CPA, as an accountant, you've worked with a number of companies, some of who love to do the bookkeeping and some of them who don't, or the strategy, or the. What's your take on that?
Oh, you're absolutely right. You have to do what you like to do, in my opinion. If you try to do things that you don't really like and are not good at, you're not going to be very successful. You bring up a very good point. If you don't want to do it, someone's got to do it. So you need a partner or some type of a service provider that's going to help you do what you need to do to stay in business.
That's
But
right.
I think one of the
Um,
problems I had in my career is that I'd always try to be somebody I wasn't.
mm.
I wanted to be a marketing guy. Well, I'm not a marketing guy, right? Ron's the marketing guy. So why would I waste any time?
I still want to be a marketing guy. Come on, let's face it.
Why would I
Well,
want to be a marketing
some
guy?
of us think it's a lot more fun than doing accounting, Ed.
You need the expertise and you need the education and the background, and if you don't have it, you're kind of not you're diluting your company, in my opinion, from
But
what it
I've got to come back on you a little bit and say, if you're in a management leadership position, you do need to understand the basics of it. You've got to, you can't just gloss over it, especially in finance. I mean, let's face it. It's, I think, one of the first rules of business. Don't take your eyes off the till. I mean, unless we're watching the money, at some point we're going to find out there is none left. So, I would say, I don't know. I trust you because you're certified, you are bound to a certain rule of ethic. But at the same time, I need to help make those decisions.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why instead of doing the work, you need to be focused on reviewing your financial statements every month. And you need to understand how your cash is every day. And you need to be looking at these metrics because if you don't, you're going to get lost and could possibly go out of business. So, yeah, I agree. I don't think you need to do the detailed journal entries, though, to do that. You want someone who's trained in accounting to do that so that they're doing it correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I would say though, if you're very, very small, you're going to have to learn to pick up a lot more balls than what you might like to. Doing what you like,
Absolutely.
doing what you like in a small business is almost an assured, loss of a business. Unless you happen to naturally love counting the money in the till in the morning and doing that kind of stuff. But if you're doing anything that happens to be creative and you like the creative side, you like the innovation, you're really good at product development, either you get big enough to hire those people, or you have to learn to do a lot of those things that you don't like to. If you can have a great product and have maybe developed it before you started your business and you want to get going in that. But if you forget about customer service along the way, guess what? You won't have any at the end of the year. So, it's like if you don't like people and you don't like customer service, you got a real problem. You better figure out how to put the customer first right out of when you get out of bed and you've got orders out there and they need to have confirmations, or you've got a problem that you don't really want to deal with it because maybe you screwed up. You know what? It's going to get worse by the hour if you don't deal with those things first. So you just have to do some things that you don't want. As a matter of fact, I think you kind of have to change your attitude about things. You know, when I was a young guy, I mean, I guess I was always somewhat motivated by money. I always saved money when I was a kid. But it took me a while to get it through my head that the purpose of business can be a product or a customer segment, but you have to learn in a way to respect the money. Because if you don't respect that you're there to increase the revenues of your business and put that kind of thing first, you won't have anything at all. It will just go away.
Let me make,
Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
now what I was going to say, just looking across the screen at the four of us, this is the way I kind of ran the business. And we were talking about that even last week, is that, I always was able to find people who could help fill in the gaps in what I couldn't do. I made a very conscious decision when I got into business. I simply didn't like the man. I didn't want to work for anybody else. I just wanted to work alone. And I put a very small financial amount, and Kathleen and I talked, and I said, if I can make this much money, I'll keep working on my own. And since that time in 96, I've been able to make it. I've never gotten wealthy, but that wasn't my intention in the first place. It was more to be able to help people that I work with and be able to do it in an independent way.
But you still had to have enough money to meet that threshold.
Yeah, I had a threshold. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But I guess my point here is that mathematically I'm kind of a minnow. But I can, I was able to find Ed and other people like him to help me. And that's what I see here on the screen. We have four people with very different skill sets, who can complement one another. And that to me is what, part of my responsibility as a small businessman is. And to my family, it was, I had to make enough to be able to help us grow and survive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Boy, I get so excited, Ron, about Microgiants, the organization that you started, because you can provide guidance and expertise to folks that are starting businesses that don't have all the skill sets.
Well, we're all doing that. Yeah.
And I think that is a great program that you have going, and I think it could be so much more and it can do so much good to so many people that are trying to start out in the business world.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And of course, to thank all of you for all of the dedication you've had these, my goodness, almost 5 years now we've been doing this. And so it's been terrific. So how did you, Ray, did you not find, you had to find some people to help you on the things that you didn't really know about, but you knew you had to go out and develop some business. You enjoy getting out and selling.
Yeah.
You
that's
enjoy
true.
people. You enjoy the whole process of doing that. But there had to be some things that you really didn't enjoy doing. How did you do that? How'd you get through those things? What kinds of
Well,
did
the
you
point
use?
is that I didn't. I just passed them on to the Eds of the world and the John Mills who knew technology, and the guys like you who knew the marketing.
Yeah.
I mean, I did my own, but beyond that, I always found it was important to collaborate and work together and find people who could fill in the gaps that I knew either were not in my wheelhouse or that I had no desire to do.
Well, so, but how did you know that you had no desire to do it? And now you had some sort of like natural capabilities, and that is to do this collaboration. I mean, you developed a whole series on leadership that really is to a large degree about doing things together and teamwork.
Yeah, well,
So
that's true. Yeah,
that was sort of a
and
natural thing for you. But if you're a loner, what do you do? Where are the tools?
yeah.
How do you make a leader out of a loner who wants to work by himself but only has two of the six essential skills? Where does that go?
Okay, John, it's your turn.
Well, here's the deal with the skills. You can't change the core behavior of an individual, and I think Ed and I were talking earlier on. You can't change that. However, what you can do is you can help those individuals to honor the discipline, to get training in it, and to work through it, and to bring that together. So I'd say part of the deal comes down to teamship. How do we actually operate as a team? Because at some point you're going to have more than one. So now how do we truly embrace each other's individuality so that we can actually work between our skill sets and our disciplines, even though your job description may require some degree of accountability and documentation and admin. At some point, you may not be as good as that as you are relationship building, but you still have to do it. And maybe that's where you get people around you to help support it. I don't know that I'm answering you particularly well on this, except to say that if it's not in your core, what you love to do, you're going to struggle with it. And you just have to become aware that that's a piece of the puzzle that you're going to have to work through. I'll give you an example of something that has happened quite often in Middle America. People who are in sales, and you had multiple people in sales, were very effective salespeople. And at some point after they've done that for 2 or 3 years, they would get given the opportunity to become the sales manager. And it would be great. Let's put them in sales manager. And 9 times out of 10, the very best sales guys would fail at being the sales manager.
Yeah.
And
right.
you think it's a natural step, but it's not, because the core work. Can you address that a little bit, Ron? Because you've seen this happen.
Yeah, I've been involved in several of those over the years, and made mistakes of picking the wrong people who were really good at sales, but they didn't have that leadership quality that Ray has taught for so many years, to recognize that they're now in a new place. They might be able to demonstrate how to sell, but it doesn't mean that they can take a look at people's personalities and hire the right people and put the right people in the right jobs in order to get, continue to build that sales team. They may be horrible at organization. When you've got a team of salespeople, 3, 4, 5, 6, and maybe especially when you get a team up to, 10, 15, 20, you now have an administrative job along with the training and the discipline, and you got to fire people because they didn't make it. And, this is a whole different thing. It's a management job.
Yeah.
Well, and the attention to detail and I'm not saying that sales guys don't need to be paying attention to detail, but when I was in the heart of sales, we would get the sales to come together. There would be a need of a client, and there would be the ability for a company to produce, and there was a bit of plastic in between, and that came down to the terms and conditions, and that came down to the price, and it came to the delivery cycle and the specifications. We were working in military spec stuff, and sometimes things would happen in a different environment that you'd get everything done, but we need this and this and this, and so that was the administrative end of it. The sales manager and the detail engineering staff would then kick in. You've done your work of bringing these guys close. Now you got to go through those details. And that can be very boring for somebody who's in sales. I'm like, hey, I've got you guys together. You go figure it out.
Oh, many times. I can remember, I can't remember, let's see. I was one of my clients throughout the years. They were talking about expanding the office, and people said, "Oh, you're going to have a spot for the salespeople now. They can come in." And the owner, very wise, having been there before, basically said, "Are you kidding? We're not going to allow a single salesperson into the administrative office ever,
ever,
because every time they come in, it's like, 'Hey, Mary, how you doing? Good to see you again. And how was that bottle of wine that I gave you a couple of weeks ago? And I ran into your husband, and let me tell you about it's like, come on, we can't do any work with you guys." So he banned him. He banned him.
So then you've got sales guys.
Yeah.
Right, you got sales guys, you got you got admin guys, and then in our case, we had engineering guys. Now, the engineering guys were at the back end of the bus as far as we were concerned, except nothing would happen if they didn't do their job. But they would be sitting down with spreadsheets and metrics and scales, figuring out and they didn't want the phone calls. They didn't want to be interrupted.
No.
They just simply wanted to get down and do it. Now, that sales guys and the engineering guys were miles apart. And then we had a group of people who were called sales engineers.
Uh-oh.
Now, there's an interesting mix.
And what did they do?
Well, this was the guy that was an engineer, but he actually had a bit of a flair for people. And so he was let out a little bit to go and travel with the sales guy so that he wouldn't, break too many bones, and they would get to the details a little bit earlier before we landed the fish, so to speak. And that worked really well. We're talking about, corporate America, Magnavox, ITT, these guys, and it was an engineered product. It was a design product. It was something that didn't exist. But at the same time, the sales guy would need to work with engineering, and there'd be this tension, palpable tension of, the sales team getting upset with the engineering team for not delivering the goods enough.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess that's the way it's got to be a little bit.
Well, you have to.
But can you train? You can't train the sales guy to be an engineer, probably, but you can train him to respect it, to know that it's necessary, and to honor it, and to treat the engineering guys with a great deal of respect, so they can get their job done.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like an interesting metaphor. It's like we were told to kill the animals and then turn around and let somebody else butcher it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's a little bit like the rat catcher. Killing it is the fun part. They bring in then they dump the rat on on the threshold of your house there.
Yeah.
They don't want to do anything with it. They just want their reward from the owner,
Exactly.
from the owner, that it actually accomplished its job. A great sales job. They were the hunters.
Yeah.
They didn't want to eat the thing, So we have all of these things, and it's very tough. Now, John, when you mentioned that, it's a great example of a business that sounds almost too detailed, compartmentalized in order to start alone. Did you start that business alone?
No, it is.
Did you bring in some people that did some of that stuff?
So that particular business, I started by myself, but realized very quickly that we needed help. And so then, you'd have somebody back in the office doing all the timing and the details and filling in crossing the T's and dotting the I's and going out and doing all the back-end specification work that would support what you're doing. And so it had to grow. Well, and part of that was, if you've got a good sales guy, you need him to be out on the road. You don't want him sitting behind a desk.
Right.
And if you've got a good detailed guy who's good at engineering, quite often you don't want him out on the road. So we end up doing the things that we naturally like to do. This goes back to the beginning of the conversation. Can we teach somebody other traits? Yes, you can. It will just be difficult and slow, and probably not a great deal of joy.
But you had to do those things when you were brand new. How did you discipline yourself?
Okay, so that's the hard part, because
that's what we're talking about, is the hard part.
Okay, so we're in the desert. We're looking at the oasis. And at some point, the only way to get to the oasis, is to travel through the desert. And the only way to do that is to conserve water, is to stay on the trail, is to make sure your equipment and your food, you got to pay attention to those details. And if you don't pay attention to those details, you will be gone. You just won't get to the oasis. So there has to be this reality that I don't want to do this the way I'm doing it, but I have to.
Yes.
I was going to bring up the analogy early on, and, quite often we like to drive a car. We love to drive, but we don't necessarily want to maintain it. But there's no big deal if you don't maintain the car well. You just break down and you stop. Well, in my younger life, I took flying lessons, and I ended up flying. And I realized there's a big difference here, because when you start flying, if you don't want to maintain the airplane, I guess that's your choice. But at some point, you are going to die. And, before you fly, there is this regiment, extremely strict regiment, And it takes 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and it's not optional. And I don't want to do it. But guess what, folks? That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
If you're going to step, and so I think a little bit about business that people haven't quite figured out is sometimes there's quite a slew of things that we just have to do it that way. It's not optional. It's not a choice if you want to stay in business.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just have to do it.
Yeah. And I think we're all kind of at the same place there. I mean, coming with you just have to do it. And so let me pose the question as we kind of wrap up. If you don't want to do it to the point to where you procrastinate and you don't do it, how do you get yourself to do it? Don't all speak up at once.
Well, if you don't do it, you're not going to survive. If you don't learn how to live off the land, you're not going to make it to the oasis.
Yeah.
So you're automatically going to be out. You got to do what you got to do to survive, and there's no other alternatives to that.
Well, this explains all the failure rates potentially.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, Ron, 80% of all businesses end up as buzzard bait.
That's right.
In the desert, right?
Yeah,
in the desert. That's right. Well, so there are a couple of things that, and maybe we'll leave this for another time, but there are a couple of things you can do to motivate yourself. Because I was one of these people that, wanted to do this, wanted to do that. I wanted to do more stuff than I didn't want to do. But I would rather do one thing or another thing. And you have to figure out mechanisms that work for each individual person to get you to focus on what has to happen first. Sometimes it's do the thing you don't want to do first, and your reward is doing the thing that you want to do. So there's one method. Another one is to put things into, if you got a list of things you have to do. Stephen Covey put together a little chart, 4 quadrants. You've got every urgent and not urgent. And so that's the first category. And let's see, the second category escapes me at the moment. But I know you all remember doing this. It's whether or not it's urgent and not urgent, important and not important. Those are the 4 quadrants. And I find that if you focus on the urgent and important, you may not want to do those, but they're first in line. So if you don't lie about how important it is to yourself, and you force yourself to do the urgent and important things first, then you get to the things that are less. That's one way to stay in business. If it's important to get to the desert, to the oasis, or you will die of thirst. Is it urgent? Well, how much water are you carrying with you? So if you're carrying a certain supply of water, maybe it's not urgent. It's always important. Maybe it's not urgent. Maybe it's a little less urgent than something else, but it easily falls into these little pieces. And I found those kinds of things and ranking in the way similar to that would kind of get me focused on, okay, I'm up, I'm fresh, I'm ready to go. What should I do first? And many times I didn't want to do what was urgent and important. But if I had a list and I just basically committed to that, because the outcome was survival, but the bigger outcome is I know I have to create cash flow to stay in business. To do that, I'm going to use those couple of things to help me determine what's urgent and important. So there are ways to do this. And the 2 books that I shared earlier on the screen, I think, are things that you can do to try and get yourself motivated. But as each of you have said, if you can't get yourself motivated to do the things you don't want to do or find somebody, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Closing comments. Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, each of us, either by default or design, end up figuring out how to make it work, and for me, I happen to find a tool that I could use, which in this case, as you guys recall, was Employment Training Panel, which I could bring into clients and say, hey, I can help you get money to retrain your employees. And as long as I'm at that, I'll be helping you, I'll be doing the training.
Mm-hmm.
So from the time I learned that in 96, it was kind of the backbone of the business and kept me going until I retired. So,
Yeah.
that was something that, I stumbled upon, but it was the backbone of my success.
But it was because you were looking for something that would be beneficial to customers and a
Yes.
way to close business. I mean, you kind of sensed that this would be a good thing, and you employed it. No, it
Right.
worked very well. Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to jump in for a second. I think two things come to my mind is, first of all, we're going across the desert. What's important? At the end of the day, the most important thing is water. It's not food. It's not shoes. It's water, but you're going to die without it. And I would say in business, the most important thing is cash in the bank. It's money or resources or credit. And I think a lot of people don't want to be in love with money. And there's a bunch of verses in the Bible about being about money, but it never disdains money. It just says you shouldn't love it above all things.
Mhm.
But I think in business, money is the indicator that we need to be aware of. And it's okay to go into debt, provided we understand why we're doing it, how long we're going to be there, and how we're going to come out of it. But you've got to pay attention to it. You've got to understand it. The second thing that I'd say, apart from money, is what are the metrics of success? Sometimes in business, we do it because we're benefiting a great deal of people. We're educating people. We're spreading some form of education that is valuable. And the money doesn't line up so much, but it's not failing. The money's there, but how we're touching people is vitally important. And so there have been times in my life where I've said, well, we're not making a lot of money, but we are helping a lot of people to change their lives or do something. And that's I think, an equally acceptable outcome. But there's a metric to it. You've got to know what it is. It comes back to accounting. What are you trying to do? How far along the road? And what is your metrics of success?
Mhm.
So,
And how much
I think-
danger do you put your business in by missing the money part? Because nonprofits have to have cash in order to pay
Oh,
their
yeah.
employees. So, there's nobody that doesn't need the money. They all need this. Everybody has to have a little bit of surplus, even if it's a small amount. You may not
Oh,
want to
yeah.
be rich, but you don't want to put your employees in jeopardy. You don't want your customers in jeopardy. So you still have to pay attention to it. And there's that certain place where if you don't go there, you don't stay at all. You're dead in the desert. Yeah.
You can't disdain it. You might not like it, but you can't disdain it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's absolutely necessary for survival.
Yeah. Ed, wrap this up for us.
Cash is king.
Oh, why did I suspect you might do that?
Okay.
Without cash, you got nothing. And where does cash come from? Comes from servicing your customers.
Yeah.
So it's
And,
extremely important. But I think a lot of small businesses miss out on the advantage of talking to key advisors on how they can improve their business.
Yeah.
And they don't have enough time because maybe they're emptying the waste baskets at night rather than focusing on ways to make their business more effective. Advisors are very important. And if you get a good wide dispersion of skill sets, it can really have a profound impact on your business.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, good. Well done, gentlemen. And we will see everybody again next week for another exciting meeting from the Four
Yes.
Consulting Amigos. All right. Thanks. See you guys.